it feels like my mission is to collect the people, to connect people, that we can build this thing so together we could do something that has more credibility. Remote viewing, astral projecting. I was just looking at Upsight and I stumble upon this ship in space, right? And I'm looking at these grays and they're all standing in a circle and I'm watching them. They don't see me, right? I'm watching them. And they're all looking down. It was like a town. Their eyes were following the people, right? Their eyes were following the people. When the eye went from one person to the other, when it left one gray's field of vision, the eye from the other gray would pick it up. I mean, they knew what they were doing. It's like a chorus. They all had their part to play. Once the beings, any being, whether it's a mantid or gray, once they know you can see them, now you're on their radar.
Welcome, everyone, to Cosmic Convergence. Thank you for joining me. My name is Daniel. I also go by Gray Druid, and I am joined with my brothers here. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Matt, for joining us today and talking about the phenomenon and what you described as Upsight. Your information has been out there for a long, long time, and wanted to know, with your experience with Upsight, and would like to have a little description of what that is versus PK remote viewing, precognition, and how that is different from everything else.
Great. You want me to start with giving you a description of what it looks like? So Upsight vision, which I've described, Upsight vision is the ability to see and interact with holographic images that are everywhere around us, me. I always say both when I write, because I think only I see them. I still think we have this biofield that we can pick up things. In any case, everyone always wants to know what they look like. So I'm going to give you two examples, and I'm sure most of your viewers more than likely have seen one of these. There was a show on Netflix a few years ago called The Queen's Gambit. There's a scene where the protagonist is lying in the bed, a couple of scenes, and she's laying in bed and looks at the ceiling and she moves the chess pieces, right? They're out there, she's watching them and she's moving with them. That is what it looks like. If you have not seen that, there's also a scene, Tony Stark in the Iron Man movies, where he's in his office and the hologram, the universe hologram, is around him. It is that immersive. Now, and it is even that detailed, but I don't have the control of it, obviously, that Iron Man had, because it's not an AI, or maybe it is, but I don't have control of it that way. So that's what it looks like. And I've been doing it for a dozen years now. And I started doing it after coming out of an addiction and a mental health crisis back in 2012.
So with the Upsight ability, when it occurs, do you experience any like bodily and or reality changing sensations that may or may not seem explainable? Like, sometimes when we experience like maybe a drop in biometric pressure, or just any kind of like environmental changes that seem to go just feel odd to you in any way, or maybe you've grown accustomed to them?
Not at all. That's what, actually, you're the second person that asked me this week. I find that interesting. I've done a dozen of these, and then to say that's so funny. So the answer is no. I mean, and it's also funny, I hadn't even thought about it. And I like getting the questions I haven't thought about. Maybe it's because I've done it so long. But no, I can literally shift my attention, and there it is, right there in front of me. So there's no changes except the shift in attention. And I want to make another point, because it's really important for people that are listening. This is not a vivid mind's eye. Okay, so what do I mean when I say that? I don't think it's hyperphantasia, or however you describe that word. What do I mean when I say that? So if I'm driving a car and you're sitting next to me and we're all in the car and I'm driving and I say, hey, remember the Iron Man poster with Downey Jr., remember the Star Wars poster when we were kids? Even though I'm driving the car, I can picture that in my mind's eye, right? So I can do motor activity while I'm driving. If I'm doing Upsight, I cannot drive the car. If I did, I would drive it into, the side of the road, because I need to focus on the images, right? I need to focus on it. So if Daniel was driving the car and I was a passenger, I could still do it then, which I find intriguing too. So I can be in a moving vehicle or any kind of moving place, but I can't be focusing on it.
So you're saying like you visually are seeing like the hologram, where you have to focus on it and all the details and kind of getting the dimensions and everything for it. So it's going to be very separate from for, let's say, remote viewing, which you have obviously you're you're projecting yourself, you're getting information, you're getting data, but it's still, you can be doing things while remote viewing. Technically, you don't have to be in a meditative state by locating to that location to get data. So it's going to be very different, where you are visually seeing it and you have to focus.
Yeah, and another thing, and I definitely want to circle back about remote viewing, because if you've studied it for 4 years, you've done more than me. I've played with it. That's what I like to say. I certainly know about it. I knew I was doing it. I was doing it before I knew what I was doing. Okay. So now another question is, are you sure it's not a figment of your imagination? Are you sure it's outside of you? Is it internal and external? The answer is both. But I want to give you an example of why we know it's external. And again, we'll jump back on this, George, when you talk about ions, because we'll talk about the testing I did when I went out there last summer. But there's a few ways we know it's outside of us, other than the technology we use to measure it. One is that my eyes get tired the same way your eyes would get tired watching something, right? The second way, let's call it smooth pursuit, right? My eye, if I'm looking at what we would consider a blank wall, and I see a jaguar running across the savannah, or jaguar running up a tree, my eye will follow that across without any jumps, or it can even follow it up without any jumps. If you're faking that, it's stochastic, you jump. And the final way, and this is the one that my wife and I tested many times, because I'm like, I want to see if this works. I want to see if you can tell it because you're outside of me, is that when I see something arousing or exciting or scary, my pupils dilate. So you cannot willfully dilate your pupils. It has to come from an external source. So those are ways we know it's external. And those are ways we can use technology to judge those. But I'm just saying, if I'm in a room with people, those are ways that I can show it without using technology. Because I've done it for a dozen years. I don't have technology in my home to set this stuff up. I just, we play with it, my friends and I. So that's how we know. Now, once I'm engaged with it, right? So let's say I'm watching two kids on the beach throwing a Frisbee. Let's say for whatever reason, that is the scene that is there when I turn my attention. Now it's like, okay, I can think, change the Frisbee into a football. Now they're throwing a football. I can think, make Godzilla come out of the ocean and devour those poor kids, right? I can do, it's like, it's a game. And it happens, and it is easy to control. Now, this is where, if you want to get really detailed, which Godzilla, right? I mean, let's talk from the movies. Is it, which version of it? Is it the original one, or it's now? I will, once one comes up, maybe I can, if I know enough about something that much, maybe I can change it. Also, no, make it look like the one from the 1990s, right? And make it look like the more recent one. And that is what's so extraordinary is that how specific this gets, right? I can see a cutaway on the side of a car, right? That something might be out of place because I don't know enough about automobiles, like if a carburetor is not in the right place, but it will show me something that is that extraordinary and detailed, even with the human body.
Since you don't get any bodily sensations, or you don't feel any kind of like atmospheric changes around you, for those that are new to you, could you perhaps explain or describe the very first instance that this Upsight ability came to you?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
just like how you felt about it at the time, like what you were thinking about and stuff like that, as far as the effects.
Okay, yeah. So wait, hold on. The first time I was on coke. So let's be clear. The first time I was high, I was wasted. It was December 28th, 2012, a year after this whole psychotic journey started. Right? I'm on the couch. I did some coke. I'm looking off to the side, and I see these 4 things in this order: the back of a dinosaur, followed by blood cells moving through a body, followed by a slot machine, followed by the Grim Reaper, in that order. And my feeling, so when I say I didn't feel anything, I was absolutely in awe, right? I was in awe of that. And I knew instinctively that I did not have to be on drugs to do this. I don't know how I knew it, but I was like, wait a minute, if I can do this now, I knew it. And I also knew that if people were going to take me seriously, you know what I mean? If to prove it, I had to be clean and sober. So I've been clean and sober 11 years, and I can still do it. So my sobriety, and I take care of my mental health. I take care of my physical health, because Well, because I want to, because I enjoy it, and I wanted to connect with my family because there's a backstory there. You know, some things that we went through, which we're all happy. The book, I wrote a book about this, by the way. Jesus Goes to Hollywood: A Memoir of Madness. It's about the year, my psychotic year. The last third of it is me looking for answers for this. I don't find answers in the book. I didn't find answers. You know, I don't have any answers. I didn't get started research until Ions last year. So the feeling of awe was the first thing, and it's so weird too when you do something like this. I still feel awe of it, but sometimes it's like an exhaustion because you're like, all right, I'm tired, I want to go to bed, I don't want to see dinosaurs, you know, flying around wherever they're flying around. So then I'm like, okay, do a side of a stream, do a brook, do an ocean scene, and then I drift off to sleep.
Tom, when I've seen your content and I've come across your story, you speak of this term called gamification. And in terms of the formative experiences when, you know, you were on substances, that there was a sequential progression of this journey that allowed you to tap into some kind of latent ability with Upsight. And you've received various images, say, of the double genetic helix. You've also been able to go on a ship with beings that were surrounded by a table, these grays, and that you mentioned something about the eyes and how it was projecting downwards towards a scene of people here on Earth. With respect to some of this messaging or some of these visuals or imagery that you've experienced, I wanted to ask you about the interactivity aspect rather than just viewing these scenes with these beings or some of these holographic images. Are you able, with this Upsight ability, to effectuate some kind of change or manifest any kinds of movement, for instance, in this holographic kind of paradigm?
Let's start with the gamification, and then I'll circle back to that part. Because the gamification, when I talk about that, it's a very specific series of events around mathematics. Okay, so I had my own business for 20 years. I used math for margins, commissions, that kind of stuff. I understand math, but I'm not in any way, nor do I want to be a mathematician. But I became obsessed with math. I mean, obsessed when this happens. And I read all the history, every history about the mathematics, the history discoveries, how people fought about getting their theorems published, how there was serious mathematicians, you know, who would argue against whether something is real or not, negative numbers, all that stuff. So I know about the history of mathematics, and I know how my abilities. Let's say my abilities are a good undergraduate mathematics student, right? The reason I'm telling you this, so that's important for me getting where I am. Where the extraordinary ability is for me, and this is extraordinary, and I will own this, and is the topological spaces and the manifolds that I can deconstruct, that I can drive around and jump from. They're nothing short of extraordinary. Now, over the years, I would get down, let's call it downloads, right? I would either get some kind of mathematical equation some non-human intelligent guide would want me to figure out. Once I knew it well enough, and this is, I'm making the connection all the years later, by the way, guys, right? Once this part, okay, you're like, he's good. You know, the next part, right? It's almost like the red to the green light. It wasn't like that, but it was like that. So then the next part came, and the next part, and the next part, until finally, about 4 years ago, I have got this multi-dimensional coordinate system literally built, sitting here in my mind. I could build it with the right team tomorrow if we wanted to. The same way, and I will use this as Tesla said he had his AC current generator that he saw in his mind's eye, and he built it before he created it. I use that example is because most people who study and are curious about this kind of thing, most people know Tesla, and they certainly know that he built this, and he had this ability to visualize these images in his minds. So there's got to be a construct there. He was a genius engineer. I'm definitely not that, but I've got this thing, and it is really cool. And it is not, it is Cartesian. It's like Cartesian on steroids. I mean, for lack of another description. And when I first did it, my cousin, who's a mathematics professor, she's like, Tom, this is cool. I sent her one of Crazy. She's like, yes, this is true. She goes, it would be great to see a geometric solution along with it. And I thought about that a lot. And this is, again, 10 years ago. I'm like, I realized it's not a geometric solution. They're points, they're positions in space. So, you have the Pythagoras theorem. If you look at a triangle, you can see a squared, b squared, c squared. This is like point A, point B, maybe point C is behind you, maybe point C. You know what I mean? This is that. I hope that's a good description. Okay, that's on the gamification. In my book, I call this the ability Upsight, and the place I go, I called it Schizopedia. Now, the reason I did that, because it was a clever way to say schizophrenic and Wikipedia, because there was an intelligence there, but it was also not honest and not true, right? Since then, I call it the organic metaverse, but it could be the Akashic Record, the Book of Life, the newest sphere. It could be all of these things. It could be pieces of these things. So this is the reason that question is good is because some people call themselves star seeds and they get information from these non-human intelligence. That is not me. I don't do that, right? I don't know. That's nothing like that. Nobody's telling me secret, privileged information at all. Now, but they definitely can see me and they can communicate me and they can nudge me in certain directions. And I know there's an exchange of information, whether it's willfully on their part, and I'm talking a multitude of different non-human intelligence. Maybe they've got this treaty, say, don't tell them this, It feels like my mission is to collect the people, to connect people, that we can build this thing so together we could do something that has more credibility than just one person saying they're a starseed. Again, and I'm not saying I don't believe starseeds, because I believe those things. Obviously, how can I not believe somebody having this experience? Obviously, these things are happening. They're happening to me in different ways. I was never abducted. You can make a strong case I was coerced to leave my family so I could be alone on St. John's for a while. I could really make a strong case for that now. In the beginning, I was like, well, I need to take responsibility for my addiction, right? You don't want to blame anyone else for that, but you're like, hold on a minute. You're fine. I'm a drug addict. I'm in recovery, but you know what? Maybe I needed to be away from this so I could do all these things and learn, and it's definitely less invasive than an abduction. So to answer your question, I can certainly interface in this organic metaverse. I can see these beings. I know they're communicating. Sometimes they'll communicate with me. The grays in the beginning, and I found this bizarre. When I was working on math, they would come as a nuisance. The same way, I don't see now, am I insulting a gray? The same way a housefly would annoy me, right? I mean, I'd be trying to figure out this problem, and it's like, stop. In fact, they actually jumped in when I was testing at ions, right? But I had to ignore them because it would have screwed with all the data. That's where I am with interacting with these beings, right? I am not like a diplomat, right? I am more of a, hold on, there's something for us to see here. I'm more like an explorer, and let's find other people smarter, more connected, better technology, and let's build something. I can do this in a lab, right? I don't have to wait. I don't have to wait for some kind of feeling to come over me. If I decided to, I was going to get an MRI. Well, I've done 2 MRIs. We'll talk about that in a minute. This thing will be here, right? These beings will show up. I don't see 5. I turn on the lights and they come. I would like to get a bigger data set to go back to ions, right? That's what I would like to do. That's why I'm having these conversations with you guys.
It's more of a statement than a question, but like, I know that you might be able to like feed on this or give me your thoughts on this. And I wrote these down. But my first statement is that your ability with Upsight seems to correlate with the abductees and near-death experiences are expressing in cases that mention that the universe is holographic in nature. Would it be safe to say or theorize that this is a way to see the blueprint of this dimension being laid out for you? Because a lot of times spirit guides that come through in like hypnosis and stuff like that will mention that there is a blueprint that we're, as humans, typically unable to see, or we're completely unaware of. And it sounds like that's what you're seeing, or that's a portion of what you're seeing, which could lead to the phenomena such as like precognition, like knowing something's going to happen before it happens. I've had my own precognition events, but none quite like yours, since abilities seem to differ between individuals, such as a medium who will draw to connect. And I know you just mentioned that you don't need to do that. You could just turn it on. And there's some people that need to, in order to tap into their abilities, they have to do something like drawing that gets them in the zone or something like that. But that was just more of like a validating statement for me, because you're mentioning seeing all of this stuff, this structure that we're completely unaware of, it being holographic in nature. That another thing that they say often is that everything is made up of lights, or what we call light energy, which sounds like what you're describing.
So yeah, you've got a lot of things here. Let me touch on the ones.
Sorry.
A couple. Let's talk about light. When I was in the second MRI, right? I was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this because this is a product of my brain and it's an electromagnetic wave, and these giant magnets are going to interfere with it. It was such an assumption. I knew I would not be able to do it. And I would, by the way, I got the second MRI. I got both of them because I'm like, there's a tumor, there's a lesion, there's stroke, there's damage from drugs. There is no physiological damage to my brain or my body or anything. So there's no scientists, there's no clinicians like, oh, this is what happened. They don't know. They have no idea. They're like, something open with your brain for your drug, because drugs. Well, no shit. I mean, obviously, no shit. That's not helpful. But it made me go in another direction, right? So I could do it. Business as usual. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's got to have to do with gravity, because gravity and magnets, magnets and gravity are not necessarily, one doesn't influence the other. And I have a blog on this on Medium about dark matter and dark energy. It's like, well, like electromagnetic spectrum doesn't pick up that. That's why it's called dark. I'm like, wait, what if I'm seeing this dark matter that's not just out there? It's also here. Everyone talks about what's out there. It's right here. So that is my hypothesis. As far as the near-death experience, yeah, I think there are some similarities. And in fact, this coordinate system that I have, it's almost like I didn't invent it. It's there. I was put it together. It's the way, this is the structure of the universe. And if you want to get out there, and I've seen what has been the birth of the universe, right? Not only the beginning, as it has evolved through time. I can say I could draw this. I could draw it with help. This one's very obviously, it changes. It's very complex. But the typical image that they have when you see any astrophysicist, like Big Bang and everything over here, everything like this has happened eons ago, that's nonsense. It just didn't go one way. That's ridiculous. Yeah, exactly. It's this way. It's many ways. So I find that interesting. Now, maybe they're doing that and they know better. They just do that because it's, for school and teaching, because it is pretty simple. But if they are, they should have some other element to say, well, this is the more complex, and they don't. There's so many things that we don't know, obviously. And I think this has a quantum element to it that should be explored. There's so many things that should be explored. Eventually, Daniel, the remote viewing element, right? So the remote viewing piece of it. So let me ask you a question, if I can, Daniel. So let's say I'm remote viewing, right? I'm looking at the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and I'm watching people around. My perspective, I'm remote viewing, right? But from the government perspective, and people that have done remote viewing, and you do it to try to hit a target, I'm not remote viewing. I'm just looking at something that may or may not have happened. Because to remote view is to pass a test to make sure that you're doing what they want you to do. So to me, and I would love your thoughts on this, it's still remote viewing, but it's not hitting. If it's singing, you want to hit the D note. I can't necessarily hit the D note. I can remote view, but I can't hit the D note. What are your thoughts on that?
My personal opinion is I feel like it is all part of the same aspect of us tapping into the reality of whatever this 3D holographic matrix of data, light, information, love, all the different energies that are going on. But I would say, like, if you were to classify it like remote viewing is a specific way of filtering out data to make sure that it's not being influenced by imagination or information that was given to you that you're going to muddy the waters. When it comes to all the different aspects of it, people do have innate strengths in each one. I personally can remote view, but I really specifically did well with remote influencing. I can't really go into specifics on that, but those are things that I just had a natural bend towards. What really interests me is like the fact that you were able to tap into this Upsight and lock something with you where now it's just innate, like, oh yeah, I can do this. Like it's that type of flow state where you're just, oh, it's a part. I feel like it's all from the same type of source. And I don't know if that's a limiting factor where we put ourselves into these categories and we're like, oh, well, I can remote view and I actually can't, I can't channel, and you're having this limiting factor I don't know if that answered specifically your
Well, no, it
question.
does. Well, here's what's so this is what's interesting. Yeah, I've talked about this before, but you guys might not have heard it. And this is where, like, I feel like it's an evolutionary, it's a survival thing. I cannot remote view Epstein committing suicide. I can't see it. It will not let me do something that may be a danger to me. It will not let me do it. I cannot remote view Area 51. I'll get closer. It shows something like it's funny. This is so funny. This is what I first realized. I'm like, wait a minute. This is like a smart instinct survival thing, that it will not let you see something that could be dangerous to Tom, the physical Tom, right? So I see guard dogs like Dobermans and soldiers outside this door, and I can't get past the door. Now I find that it's like, is that me? Is that my unconscious? I don't know, but it's something, a survival piece to it. Because if I was on these podcasts, started talking about exactly what happened, it would be dangerous. But it's smart enough for me, because I have a big mouth and I do talk about stuff, to not let me see it and accidentally, see something I'm not supposed to see. So I find that extraordinary.
So one thing I remember with Ingo Swann and a lot of his interviews that he's talked about, especially when he remote viewed to the moon and saw the beings up there, they were mining it, and they instantly like looked at where he was projecting, and they're like, there's somebody there. And he like freaked out and boop, popped out, But one thing that he did ask, he's like, can they figure out where we are? And the gentleman, who was obviously his handler, didn't say anything, but he could read that this is something they can do. I do think there are elements of occultism, of like, let's say, warding or other things, the spiritual, like religious context, or, different things that we've thought as just being magical or whatever. But I do think there are ways to guard areas or yourself. There's other things that create a barrier that you can't get through. And when you try to remote view or project yourself, there tends to be this, like, you're hitting a wall. I've experienced that myself personally. And I've also heard of people's experiences of trying to get into a location, and then they actually have physical, like, harm befalls them or other things like that. So I think there is a nature of it.
Well, I liken it to any other sense. If you walk into a kitchen, and somebody's cooking cookies, you can't make yourself not smell the cookies if you smell it, right? Now, that said, if there's a stove is on, you open the stove, you put your hand slowly towards it, your brain is going to say, don't get closer, and you pull it away. You could fight it, but it would be dumb to do that, right? Clearly I've thought about this a lot. And this is the same kind. It's like I'm not an idiot. Like, and what's the payoff, right? The remote viewing thing and every other psi ability, precog, telepathy, lucid dreaming, to me, those are still secondary to this extraordinary ability that I can do on demand, right? I want to figure out what this is. I want to kind of triangulate it or figure out a way. And my wife is like, can we create a technology to see exactly what you're seeing? I don't know. Maybe. Sure. Why not? I'll say one other thing. This is for you, John. So I want to do this. I want to be the control. I want to get 5 guys that are on psilocybin, right? DMT, and I want to be the control. They're all seeing the machine elves or whatever they're seeing. If I'm clean and sober and I'm in that room and I'm seeing what they're seeing, right? Now we have a case study that we can duplicate it again and again. There's many stories, anecdotes of guys tripping. Everyone sees the same thing, but they're not. They're anecdotes, right? They're not reproducible because everyone was high, and it's not even, they don't trust it. But I believe those things are absolutely real. I believe those people are absolutely group seeing the same machine elves or whatever you want to call them. And if we could do it under scientific observation, or even without it, just for fun, but then under scientific observation, that would be extraordinary. Because now it's like a new communication, right? When Hertz discovered the radio waves, he's like, oh, wow, this is really cool. It's not going to have any significance. I mean, brilliant guy, was such a wrong statement, literally.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And I saw that in another interview where you were mentioning doing that test, and my first initial thought was, sign me up. I mean, I would love to be part of that. No, because if you can project essentially what you're seeing out there, and other people are on like psilocybin or other psychedelics, and they're able to experience that as well, that just shows the impact, the ramifications of the Upsight ability. And I definitely think that there's something there. I think that's very test worthy. And I mean, again, I would think that anybody would be a fool to pass that opportunity. I would love to do that myself personally. because I've had experiences this kind of stuff for a good portion of my life. So we had mentioned ions, okay, and if you don't mind, I'd like to switch gears to that. So once you came to the understanding that you had the ability of Upsight, you sought researchers to explore the phenomena, what you were experiencing, and to try to test it out. But thankfully, IONS, which stands for the Institute of Noetic Sciences, for anybody that is unaware, was founded by Apollo 14 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who I have a lot of respect for. Edgar Mitchell is always straight and to the point. But they performed a case study of you and your Upsight ability. Could you describe the study and subsequent findings? Because I know that I'm starting to see some publications coming out about it now.
Yeah, for sure. So last summer I went out there for a week and we spent a couple of days. We did 200 tests. Right, I was hooked up to an EEG machine, and the control was I would see an image, let's say of the Eiffel Tower, and then I would have to think of the image with my mind's eye, the kind of like we're all doing now when we think of it. Then I had to see the image with Upsight. Okay, so I would see it outside of me on wherever in front of me. Now the EEG machine was hooked up, and they were testing alpha, gamma, beta, theta, all the wave states, and they were trying to see, okay, in the different wave states, is there a difference? And the answer was off the charts, right? There's no doubt. The most obvious one, the most obvious state, and this was in fact a surprise to me, was the alpha wave state. Now, the alpha wave brain state is when you're in a relaxed brain state. You're just chill. You're just sitting here chill. When I'm doing Upsight in the alpha wave state, my brain is not chill at all. In fact, it's probably repressing something to get this in. And maybe that's not the right word, but there's some activity in the prefrontal left area where I am maybe suppressing, that's the word, something to see something else. Now, it happened, I thought it was going to be in the theta state. And that's where mediums typically have the big brain waves, and also dreaming, So I thought it was going to be a case. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a difference between both states, but the alpha state was extraordinary. Now, that is a preprint. It should be, it's still, they're back and forth with the scientists, but it should be out in the next, I would imagine, 60 days, accepted to the publication. Fingers crossed. I know we're going, I think they're going to the consciousness. IONS is going to the consciousness conference in Tucson in April. I'm actually going as well. It would be really cool if it was done and, out by then, because I think it's going to get more attention then by all the, the other academics across the globe once it's accepted to the publication. Even preprint's cool, archive and stuff, it's uploaded. But once that happens, it's going to take it to another place. So that was the test, right? That was the test.
Awesome. Yeah, I just have another reason to kick myself for moving from Arizona, because I used to live in Phoenix and I would have been able to attend that. But now I'm far off from there, so I don't know if I'll be able to do that. But thank you so very much.
I wanted to ask you, Tom, you mentioned that you had various scans that were done topologically on your brain. You had EEGs hooked up. You've had 2 MRIs. And I'm reminded of some of the neuroscience or neuropsychology research that Dr. Gary Nolan had done with experiencers, where he found that in his sample size or case study of people that have had interactions with the phenomena, that there were noticeable changes in various structures of the brain, the caudate putamen or the basal ganglia. And the implication or suggestion was that because of this increase of neuronal density in this specific area of the brain, the subsequent affect would be some kind of PK ability. Now, in the studies that you've done with the IONS Institute, my first question is, were they able to determine any increase of neuronal density in specific anatomical areas of your brain? Number one. Second question is, when you are engaged in this Upsight ability, while doing this study at the IONS Institute, were you able to get any type of research or knowledge of some kind of cross-comparative confirmation with other people that might have this same ability as you? And are you able to sense when somebody enters into this dimension or holographic realm, and you're able to determine, hey, it's a fellow human being?
First of all, there's no other it was just an EEG. So there was no other brain. They didn't get an MRI, so they didn't measure anything else. It was completely EEG. Now, that said, I was in talks with the lab director at Smith Kettlewell Eye Institute before COVID, and I was going to go there to get in an MRI and see what was going on. So that is definitely something that should happen. That did not happen now. And I'm familiar with Gary Nolan's study, and I would imagine there's something, there once that happens. The question about when something enters this space when I'm in it. If somebody walked over my shoulder, right? Well, I've got a wall behind me, but if I didn't and somebody walked up, it's the same thing. Somebody can literally come into this the same way. So maybe there's a biofield that maybe 6 feet around me. I have no idea how far back it goes. I don't know. I even kind of think I can expand it, actually, to be honest with you. But if I can't, well, maybe saying expand it is not the right word. Maybe it's expand it. Like, let's say it's a circle, and then I can focus on one part of the circle and expand that part. Does that make sense? Like only one part. So, but in any case, yes, you can feel somebody come in, and in fact, or some being or something come in. And in fact, when I was at Ions, this gray kept bumping in, and I'm like, don't pay attention, because I know, they were so strict. It was very, very strict about don't move your eyes. These things are so sensitive. Don't do anything else. So I was under, and 200 tests is a lot, and you guys get very tired. I was like, it showed up, and I'm like, I'm ignoring you. I'm just thinking that, right? I don't want to influence the test in any way. Showed up again. Finally, it went away. And I wrote about this on Twitter. The next day, I wrote a tweet thing. I was like, if this test was about, communicating with some C5 or however you want to, whatever you want to call it, we could have done something else, but it needs to be set up for those tests, right? Because like I said, the EEG tests are so specific. You're going to study one thing, any eye movement, any, change of brain state is so influenced. So I made sure I didn't do it. So the answer is yes, you can feel them come in. John, you said something earlier. Do I get a feeling? No, sometimes when I get home, or sometimes every once in a while, I think, and I guess I would call this a feeling, oh, I need to do Upsight. So you know what I mean? So that is like just this feeling. It's not a feeling when I'm doing it. I should be feeling to do it.
Yes, like a calling almost to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I got a little bit of goosebumps when you were talking about feeling the entity like approaching you, as if like if it were to happen like right now, where it would just like approach you from behind in relation to what you were saying. When I had this experience to where the rods or the entities that I were talking to were like pointing to the outside, to the door that led to the carport, and they weren't responsive any other way. And so I told my fiance, I was like, I guess they want me to go to the carport. I don't know. And so I went out into the carport, and it was probably about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I saw this flash of light in the clouds, maybe a few blocks away, but there was no thunder or lightning or anything like that. You didn't hear anything. It was just poof. And it was fast. And I feel this presence coming from behind my left and stop right along my left-hand side. And this feeling was just kind of like, okay, there's something, they're here. It was just automatic, and it was like filled me with a sense of awe. And when I looked out of the corner of my eye, which for me is anytime I can really see them inside of the corners of my eye, I saw this like this dark figure with illumination, like an aura going around it. It was the first time I ever felt that. And I knew had I looked at it straight on, it wouldn't have been there. And so I was just filled with this awe and like this kind of like connected oneness. I didn't feel anything negative. And then my fiance, Melissa, started coming from my right side. And so I, of course, had to say, hey, was that you that came from my left side? And she was like, no, I just came from your right. And I'm wondering, though, I'm not saying that I have Upsight at all, because I don't have a lot of sight ability. I feel like I'm more of the communicator, verbally and mentally. But I wonder if they were preparing to possibly show me. It's hard to tell, to show me something, and that was interrupted. I'm sorry, I don't mean to ramble.
No, that's good. Let me talk about both those things, because I think those are like really important. I use the word umvelt. If you've seen me, I talk about it. The umvelt is the way a biological organism moves through an environment, right? My umvelt before this was one way, now it's another. It is absolutely expanded. A worm, they live in the same environment with us, but they clearly don't have the same experience as humans. Birds, same thing, whales. So this being that came up behind you and you saw the corner of your eye, they know. I mean, let's just say perhaps they know that just like if we walked into a jungle and saw something and you look behind a tree, you're not going to let it catch your attention. This is the same type of intelligence. I mean, that's so from my perspective, it's so obvious. He didn't want you to see it, or maybe he did. Again, your wife or girlfriend interrupted, but maybe that was going to happen. And, because the reason I say that, because there is an environment here. I don't know what the right word, right? Hidden biosphere is the best, but it is all around us. And I think we haven't talked about the government at all. I think maybe they know more than they tell us, or maybe they're looking for more than they're telling us. I know they know more from obviously not obviously, but more than likely from the UFO side and all the nuts and bolts side. But there's got to be a consciousness piece that they know about. Maybe they're still looking for things. Maybe all the things you read about that they've made deals. Look, I'm not here to say that's not possible. Why would I have no contacts at all with the government? So here you go. I think that's one of the reasons these beings maybe picked me. I don't know. Because people, when this happens to them, like, well, I don't feel like I'm special. You know what? Maybe I'm not special, but I have this skill, just like you're good at basketball, that you're good at math, or you're good at anything else. I can't deny that. That would be as arrogant as, you know what I mean, and foolish as saying I'm special, right? It's just a fact. These things are happening, and they know, or whatever it is knows, I have this curiosity, right? To move this conversation forward. Whatever, and maybe it's wrong. That's how it feels. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not that. But I have moved the conversation forward.
You have.
If it's internal, it's still happening, right? However you want to call it. This conversation is moving forward, and there's something there to see. That I can promise you guys. As you know, you guys have all had experience.
Yeah, and that actually leads to my next question, because I've heard you mention brief talks about this, because everyone seemed. Well, maybe not everyone, but a large group of people seem to feel this kind of, especially in these now times, this kind of shift that's kind of occurring. We're seeing more UFOs, things like that, more people talking about their experiences, NDEs, hypnotherapy, you with Upsight and all of that. So my next question is, it appears that the UFO phenomenon is becoming more prominent, coinciding with increasing numbers of individuals awakening to their latent abilities. It is possible that the heightened awareness is not due to the UFOs making themselves more visible in the conventional sense, but rather because we were evolving and beginning to perceive what has always been present as we develop our abilities, whether consciously or unconsciously. From what I understand, a being from a particular dimension can only perceive dimensions below its own. So your current dimension and dimensions below it. But when you ask us, what does the fourth dimension or fifth dimension look like? We don't really have an idea. We just conceptualize it. However, through our evolutionary process, we seem to be taking the initial steps towards glimpsing what this process entails, potentially enabling us to perceive higher dimensions as nascent species. This could elucidate why in some UFO cases, individuals in close proximity to each other may observe different phenomenon or none at all. What are your thoughts on this?
So people come forward all the time and say, I have some form of this, respect all of that. Thank you for doing that. But there's a woman that I think she might have it to the same extent I do. Okay, because we've talked and she talked, and I got on a Zoom call with her, and I'm going to, within the next 60 days, the hope is I'm going to meet her. We're going to get in the room and we're going to communicate non-verbally with Upsight. That is the hope. And even if that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean it can't happen. It means there's a step that needs to happen. But Upsight shows me how to make that happen. It shows me like a step process, almost a diagram. Do this with the person, then this. So that's right. That's wild to me. So I think, yes, we're evolving into it. And yes, that's funny. I have not thought or heard about you can only see dimensions, yours or lower. But I will tell you this, Christian. Are you familiar with the book Flatland? About the three dimensions, about the dimensions, about the being, it would freak you out if you were looking at a fourth dimension, how it would come at you and you would terrify you. I like that book. And there's a part of it, though, that is different for me. But the fact that it is different for me means there's something happening to me. In the story, the person is looking at this dimension coming through the floor, right? But there's another perspective. What if the dimension comes through you? What if it's quantum and it comes through you small? That is what, there's an element, both things are happening,
Yes.
but it's like one and the other. And it's like, wait, this is so confusing. And it can, I mean, I think that's kind of the reason I went a little mad, you know, not plus the drugs, but I think there was so much stuff coming into me that my brain couldn't control. So much information. I could not tell the difference between a truth and a lie. I believed everything. All this thing just broke open and got flooded with me. And it took a long time for it to calm down and for me to live with this new filter or this new open filter. So yes, I think we are evolving into it, and I do think it's happening at a much quicker scale. I think the reason, one of the things that everyone's talking about fake news and QAnon, and everyone's making fun of these people that believe conspiracy. Let's just take it forget the facts of it. Of course there's conspiracies. The government lies to us all the time. See, I mean, now they don't have the answers, but they know that's true. Now, why do they know that's true? There's a filter in them that's called BS. And it's happening throughout the whole planet, everywhere. And the next step, these latent skills or suppressed skills or repressed, whatever you want to use, are coming forward, especially when people know they can do it. Like Roger Bannister, the 4-minute mile, it's impossible to run a 4-minute mile. He runs a 4-minute mile, next year 6 people, the next year 500. You know what? I don't know what the actual numbers are. Once you realize somebody can do it and there's proof, then people are going to pay attention and focus on it. And the more energy we have focusing on these things, the more energy we're going to have focusing on these things, if that makes sense. And look, psilocybin and the DMT research, that's going to open it up, right? We know that altered consciousness with that.
Like what you mentioned before with the L's and everything, I forgot the name of the research facility, but they're actually doing a drip feed of the DMT, and they're having people stay in those experiences longer than normal.
Trying to map those realms.
Those realms.
Yes.
Yeah. So I believe that's a thing. And I definitely lean towards what you're describing, because I agree with you.
Well, it's something the ancient shamans knew. It's something the ancient shamans knew, you know, in all of these quote unquote primitive cultures. And we've gotten away from that. You know, Western reality has gotten away from that. And I know, I'm sorry to just interject with this, Tom, but I know it came up like, hey, you know, am I special, or somebody that comes down with abilities, you know, what's so special about me? Well, why not? Why not you or myself or Christian or anybody that's viewing this right now? Because it has to start from somewhere, right? Someone has to take that torch, and like in the Olympics, when they were doing the Olympic run, you got to pass it on to somebody else, right? And so that's where the whole information and putting ourselves out there, like I'm constantly told through our spirit box sessions with the entities, put it out there. Well, how else are we going to go ahead and formulate this technology, what you're seeing with Upsight and devices and blueprints and all that other stuff? Well, it's not going to do any good if you're just sitting on it and you don't share it with other people, right? So it's putting it out there. That's what I would think that the reason why they're helping you tap into Upsight, how they're having, you know, these conversations with us and giving us these examples. And, you know, someone has to be at the forefront, and I'm glad, Tom, that you are at the forefront on this. And I can't wait to see, because I believe you're going to find more people that have the Upsight ability. I just think that's just the natural course of things, and like you said, with the runner. And, you know, we're under exciting times, and I hope that you have more validation through testing and research, for sure. And I'm very excited for the future about all of this.
Yeah, and I think in a really strange way that me having the mental health crisis and the addiction, having that as a baseline, so you would sit there and think, well, he's not got no credibility because of this. But the fact is, that does over time, as long as I don't have those symptoms and stuff again, and I don't pick up and I don't do those things again, it is credibility. Because when somebody comes forward and says, oh, no, you're this, I'm like, excuse me, no, because I was that and I know the difference. So now at this stage, like, hold on a minute, because obviously Ions was not going to have me up there if I was still exhibiting any, you know, classic, any kind of mental health issues. There was talk about that. And they're like, oh, no, okay, this guy gets it. And in fact, they use the language like a natural curiosity if somebody had something like this at this point in their life. So they were really smart and knowledgeable around it. And obviously the fact that I have this ability was really the key, you know, to, and there was discussion like, should we do this? Like, yeah, let's do it.
I think it happens way more than we understand because we're so like scared to share our experience because, you know, mainstream society is going to ostracize. You're going to get fired from your job. People are going to think you're crazy. Your family's maybe religious. They're going to throw you out because you're a crazy, you know, hyper spiritual person that believes in the devil, whatever have you. Warning flags you're worried about coming out with. I did want to just like the portal or whatever was happening. I really wanted to get your thoughts on it because when I saw that photo, and I remember specifically telling George, I'm like, I've seen this because he posted. I was like, I've seen this before. This was back in November. So, and I wanted to get your thoughts and kind of share your own experience with that particular painting.
Now, this one, this gives me chill bumps, right? So I tell all these stories because they're usually holographic. They are not in the rooms with me, right? They don't walk through the walls. This was one of those times where it was in the room with me, right? So I'm in bed, and this is relatively recent, last couple of years. I'm in bed having this dream. This gray is holding my head, and it's literally showing me everything, my whole life in front of me, telling me every step of the way, right? And I'm like, oh, cool, 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 cool. And then it lets go of my head. And I mean, like my whole life story, everything that's going to happen, and I'm prepared for it. It's cool. And he's holding my head, and he's by the end of it, he lets go of me, right? And my head presses the pillow, and he let go of me, and he disappears. He's in the room with me. But when he's gone, this was in my room, in my house, and my head is 6 inches above the pillow. I know this being was in the room with me, actually picking up my head, and it was not holographic. And my head dropped back to the pillow. And I was like in shock for a few minutes, or a few seconds, actually probably a few minutes. And I was like, holy cow, that was one of those times where you knew something was telling you something. In fact, I don't want to sit there. Up until that moment, I told you earlier about the grays being nuisances. Up until that moment, I would have said the grays are not on Team America or whatever you want to call it, Team Human. But this particular one was kind of helpful, and it tried to show me something that was important to me. Now, the annoying thing about that was I don't remember any of it. And I articulate this way better on this video, guys. I kind of summed it up because I'm remembering it, but I articulate it way better on the first minute of that video. So yeah, that's what happened with that. So I believe that guy was in the room. But here's the thing, he didn't leave the room. It just disappeared. That's what was the other thing. And I remember my head hitting the pillow like that. So that was an extraordinary experience of me being in the room with a being that, you know, physically touched me and then was gone. Or like I said, if it didn't, something made my head go 6 inches above the pillow, right? And then fall down. That's, you know, certainly that could be possible with magnets or whatever kind of thing. So yeah, that's that experience. Thank you for that. I needed that, Daniel.
No, thank you so much for sharing that experience. This was actually, I looked up the dates a few days ago. This was a day before my channeling experience. I was in the shower and I felt this, best way I can describe is like a notification in my mind or my field. And I was like, I need to communicate with them. So it was kind of like what you described earlier with that experience of like, you just get this like, oh, I need to have this interaction right now, you know? So I turn around, I kind of focus my attention, and on the wall, the shower wall, I see in my mind like that exact shape, and it's like vibrating like this, and I could feel the energy coming through into making that psi connection. And then as we were dialoguing back and forth, it was like this amber color, and it was like vibrating like that. And it looked exactly like that photo, which I thought was really fascinating because I saw that and I was like, I've seen that before. Where have I seen that? And then I remembered, I was like, oh, this is this happened back in November.
No, the reason that's funny is because that was so Olaf drew so many things, and I'm like, that's not what it looked like. That's not what it looked like. And I'm like, yeah, you've got it. Because and just so you know, that was a galaxy. It was a galaxy that was between me and this being. Now, again, a galaxy, a representation of a galaxy. That's what it was supposed to be. Yeah, I haven't thought about that image in a while, and I haven't been asked about it in a while. So thanks for that. Yeah. That was that still blows my mind now. I mean, that's like one of those things you look back on, you're like, how is that possible? I mean, everything we're talking about.
It feels very impossible.
I'd like to ask you, Tom, I'd like to
ahead,
ask you, sorry for interrupting. I'd like to ask you about this next image here, respect to this image. And I know, Tom, that you were mentioning that you can see them coming into this dimension, or maybe you're able to see into theirs. Can you describe what is going on in this particular image?
Are you guys familiar with the hitchhiker effect? Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay, so for anyone that's listening that may or watching that doesn't, it's typically you go to a place, let's say Skinwalker Ranch, and these beings notice you there, and they follow you back home, right? They follow you back home and do malevolent things in your house or whatever like it is. And people mock that and make fun of it. So from my perspective and from my experience, once the beings, any being, whether it's a mantid, a gray, it's another gray, these whatever, once they know you can see them, now you're on their radar, right? They're like, oh wow, because most of us can't. So this was like a general representation that once you make eye contact and they know it's game on with communication, all bets are off. And that's what this is. And again, all these kinds of things have communicated with me, contact with me. Again, so when I say communicate, I want to show pictures too, not literally say, Tom, what's going on? Not like that necessarily at all. It's showing me things. Sometimes it's horrible things. Sometimes it's really cool things. I know there's people that are like, that's nonsense. But again, I don't know what to say to the skeptics. I think skepticism is okay up to a point, but then it's almost like something's pathologically wrong with your way of thinking, and you are not open to something that you cannot experience. So that's on you.
The influence of NHI, and there's a lot of question as to whether these beings are benevolent, if they're malevolent, if it's even fair to appropriate these anthropomorphic value judgment calls. Now, with this particular illustration that I have on the screen, can you talk a little bit more about what is going on in this scenario and the influence that these beings might be having on humanity, and as to whether you believe or not if they have our best intention in mind?
Yeah, let's start by saying what this illustration is. So this is going back 10 years when I first started doing it. Like I said, remote viewing, astral projecting. I was just looking at Upsight and I stumble upon this ship in space, right? And I'm looking at these grays and they're all standing in a circle, and I'm watching them. They don't see me, right? I'm watching them, and they're all looking down what I think is a blank glass, clear table, for lack of another word. I don't see any controls or anything like that, and they're definitely focused on the table. I'm like, why are they looking at this clear glass table? But as I got closer, it wasn't a clear glass table. It was like a town. It was an image. It was a city, whatever you want to call it. And their eyes were following the people, right? Their eyes were following the people. And as the person, and they didn't have rays like this. I've said this when I did the illustration, they didn't have rays like this, but I know there was something coming out, and it was hard for us to illustrate it, so we decided to use these. It's more like when you see sound waves coming out in a movie. They were either following them or manipulating. When the eye went from one person to the other, when it left one gray's field of vision, the eye from the other gray would pick it up. It's almost like their eyes are like our voices, and they were communicating some kind of information. And it's almost like they had to do it like this to get perfect coverage. I mean, they knew what they were doing. It's like a chorus. They all had their part to play. So I'm watching this, and let's be clear. This is me thinking back on this for so many times. I was there for 40 seconds maybe, until two of the grays they noticed me and they started coming towards me, and I'm watching them. But when that happened, I jumped out, and I've never been back to see this type of thing again. So are they having influence? Yeah, they are. I mean, I believe that. How? Why? No idea. I mean, the abduction thing is clearly negative, right? Them annoying me, my personal experience being a nuisance in holographic form was annoying. The story I just told you about wasn't actually, it was more benign, right? I mean, it was told me something, but it wasn't I guess it was more helpful. You know, it made me, it's the first time I thought, okay, these guys are not all bad. How about that? They don't give me privileged information like you hear from starseeds. And I find that annoying, but also, okay, I think my journey is a little bit different than those people.
When you came into this event that's happening on the ship, did they take a moment to recognize that you were there? Because I just asked, because when I had my C4 abduction experience and my soul was taken into the ship, I was there for probably 5-10 seconds, like looking at, you know, whatever time is, but I was looking at them doing the control panels, and then like 4 of them then stopped and looked at me. Did you have a similar experience where you were there for a limited time and then they noticed you, or was it instant like that?
No, it's exactly right. Yeah, it was longer than that, and they didn't all notice because I think they were working, right?
Right. Yeah, the ones on the control panels weren't doing anything. They're just doing their job, but it was the other ones that shifted their perspective. Yeah, it's interesting.
So, yeah, well, it is interesting because, by the way, they turned and they came towards me. So it absolutely scared me. This is in the very beginning when I did it. And I jumped out. I'm like, what the? I was like, what is happening? But thinking back, even now, I'm like, are they servers? Are these things living beings? The ones I've seen a cutaway. The ones I've seen a cutaway are organic and mechanical. So I don't, again, by the way, this is important. Some of the things I see in Upsight are complete and utter nonsense. These things are not always true. They're clear and they're in focus, but they're not always true. This is totally my experience about where are we with these. So lucid dreamings is the closest, let's call it psi-ability, right? Because it's personal. It's like personal things, all your fears, your things that shame you, the things you want and that you love. And the grays can access this, and they can use shame against you. They can use your greed or anything else against you, right? The middle layer is the remote viewing one. That's the public space that you can see other beings in, like we saw the grays, and I've seen many other beings in. That's a place that it's I'll use a safe space, right? If you're there to communicate. And the beings that understand this know that. I think humans definitely can do that. In other words, I could see if another person can remote view, I think we could remote view the same thing at the same time. Now, that's a hypothesis I think can be tested. And the far out one is astral projection when you're in galaxies, like you said, Daniel, you're jumping among stars. And that's where I think the abstract knowledge lies, or at least that's where it is for me. It is way, way out there. I think that's where the machine elves are. Way, way, way out there. And that is just a recent thought. And it is not totally my own. It's Terence McKenna's. But when I heard him say it, I was like, huh, maybe he's right. Because he said it was like the peak or the and I was like, yeah, kind of. The machine elves are funny things. Anyway, that's what that is. And the Greys can access all of it, and some other NHIs can access all of it. That's why they can influence and influence, public figures or whatever else. But that's what this is. I think it's a good representation. And this is the Upside Vision places I can get to as well.
Like with remote viewing, how they will usually not just rely on just one individual to have a group of people to make sure they're getting the accurate place, because what I'm starting to understand is in remote viewing, everything is happening all at once. So you can picture not just the present time, you can picture other things, you can see other things going on. But what reality? Is it the one that you're in right now? Or is it in that reality? Or is it John having this conversation with us in a red shirt reality? Like, doesn't make it any less real, but at the same time, it could just be happening someplace else that doesn't really pertain to us, if that makes more sense.
Well, yeah, and so the remote viewing, the things that are dangerous. So I've seen the remote viewing of the Kennedy assassination. Have you guys seen that image? So I'll explain that. I'll explain that to you because I think that's safe to talk about now. First rifle shot, he was underneath, he's literally in the car. He's underneath the car like a stove. You have this frying pan. He's underneath the car next to Connolly, and he's shooting through the vent. And the first shot hits Kennedy right here. It's coming from this way. He grabs it like this. The only way you can do a can't miss shot is if you're 7 feet away. There it is, right there. That's obvious. Now, I've seen videos of the driver shooting him, turning around and shooting Kennedy. I don't know if that's real, but I do know this is what I see when I remote view it. And it's funny. Now, this is really interesting, Danielle. Maybe I would love the first time I saw this, the remote view would always go to the tires. Now that I did that, I watched the video from a different context, and you can see Connolly jump like something is next to him. Right, him and his wife. So after seeing this and watching the video, this is one of those, like, I'm like, damn, this probably happened, right? This is probably the way it happened. I've seen a video where the driver turns around and does the final kill shot for his head. And I don't know if that's true, but you know, that's influenced by something I've seen. It seems like that would make sense. See, you've got it right there. I've seen a video of that. So that's not something that I remote viewed. That's something I actually saw.
Yeah, that's making the waves on the internet here as of late, showing the driver turning around and shooting, because no one's paying attention to what the driver is doing at that point in time. You know, Jackie's trying to run for her life or whatever have you, you know, and so no one's paying attention to the driver, and that would be perfect. We just need to have those files put out, and just to have the honest, you know, what actually happened needs to finally come out. I mean, all the people that were involved in that have passed on at this point. It's just kind of, I guess they just don't want to have the stain on American history.
So, George, can you bring up, I want to ask you about this, because I'd love to get your thoughts about, Daniel, especially about the remote viewing on something at the quantum or microscopic level, the DNA strand, right? So I'm looking at, I see a DNA. This is like next level. What is going on? Right? Everyone knows what the DNA looks like. We can see it now, right? We can CRISPR, we can edit it and make things happen with it. I'm seeing these, I call them candy canes. They're not. They're candy cane shapes surrounding this circle, right? I think it's, and this stream going through it, right? That dark blue stream, that's dark energy, right? They're going through the whole thing. The other ones is dark matter. The blue and the purple ones represented here, and they interact. They somehow make the gene edit certain ways, right? They don't. These things are so complex. It absolutely influences our world. I see. This is how whatever I'm seeing influences our world, and I'm supposed to see it like this, right? Now, until somebody else sees this, what I see, people, especially geneticists, are going to be like, "Give me a break." But I'm telling you right now, there's an image before and an image after, and it's just like when we see a cell split from 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and it turns into a human or a frog or a sheep or whatever. There's an image before this, it's a specific visual, and an image after it. I'm going to use this as a control. I can only use it maybe once or twice. When somebody sees it, they're going to say, does this happen next? And when they describe it actually correctly, I know this person is seeing the same thing, or more than likely. Do you think that's a good idea, guys? I'll ask for your guys' feedback on that one. They absolutely influence it, our DNA.
I think those could be locks. Like if some of them could be removed, then we wouldn't have certain abilities locked.
Sure, I'll go with that.
I mean,
I'm not going to say too much.
Right. No, I'm just curious, you know.
Sure, I'll go with that. That's fair. That doesn't say too much. That's a logical thought.
What instantly comes to mind, or what I feel, is that this is some form of a depiction of how they're able to influence our, again, this is the whole soul science thing that we really don't understand, where we talk about upgrades with people's soul, or like, you know, in my case of having my C4 event when I went on the ship and then they put me under, I don't remember anything, but I know they are working on my spirit or soul. They were doing some type of operation. I don't know if people say upgrades, but there's something about them being able to vibratory or energy wise influence the soul or our field, and then it's able to also micro change aspects of DNA. That's just kind of innately what came to mind when I seen this. I don't like, it's something to do with vibration and intention. And whatever science they have, there's some type of bridge that they're able to make these micro adjustments on a DNA or like physical level, because everything is a representation. Everything that's physical is just, you know, light and vibration, right? And, you know, a 3D hologram of this reality. So there's something along that lines that we don't understand, but I don't know. That's just what came to mind instantly.
No, that's
to me.
Really good. You know, people talk about getting abducted and getting an implants, right? That, again, that's not my story. That said, for the longest time, I was on St. John's for a month by myself, secluded, drinking, doing all these things in this hotel room, building this kind of like Richard Dreyfuss built the Devil's Tower. I built this map of their galaxy in my room with rope strings hanging from, I mean, the cleaning people just stayed out of my room because he was a crazy guy in there. But I felt like I was being vibrationally re-engineered. And that is the language I've used on myself. You're the first person that said the same thing. And it's like they were doing something and it wasn't cutting into me, but there was a vibrational change. And that I believe somehow happened.
A lot of abductees and experiencers, I've heard this before. The sense is almost it's a more of a, I don't know how to describe it. It's there, but it's more of a like gentle way of modification than just going in, and they might have the technology to, but it has a greater purpose than just making physical upgrades. There's a sense of they are equipping us, or they're equipping abductees that are going through this experience with either spiritual information or information that we can't grasp. And after that upgrade, then there's a greater sense of reality, or we're able to perceive or sense or have a better connection with the NHI or whatever, entities we're having interaction with. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And I think these are, what's the word I'm looking for? Or gentler. I'll use that word. That's a perfect word, because they're here. They're helping us for Earth, because something is coming. I know that sounds ominous, but I think anybody who's paying attention, I don't know if it's just on Earth with wars or some NHI is going to, I don't know, but something is coming. And I think these beings, and the beings that there's one NHI that I communicate with that will never show. Well, that's not true. They may have showed themselves a couple of times. I can't 100% say that though, right? I know, I think they look a certain way, and there's an illustration of that, but I don't know. But anyway, they're gentler, and they just want us to get some things because we're going to need it for planet survival, because shit's going to hit the fan within the next however many years. This is the way Upsight sees something that's an illusion, right? I do want to bring up the double rainbow, right?
Okay.
When you think of a double rainbow is an illusion. You've got a rainbow, a darker rainbow with the colors going one way, and you've got another rainbow with the colors going the other way, and they're flat, supposedly flat, and it's out there. And it's an illusion of perspective. So you have to be in a certain place to see a double rainbow. Upsight has given me the ability to take a perspective that does not exist, right? The way I see a double rainbow is not as a flat horizon. It's a funnel. The inner part is, in fact, a funnel coming towards a human. So it is a funnel of dark matter. Let's just call it that for this conversation, right? And then it goes backwards. Then it gets to a point it can't go anymore, and it unravels and it goes backwards, right? And that's why it's brighter too, because let's call it a light or whatever. It's some kind of electromagnetic spectrum, or it's some kind of spectrum. I don't know. Gravitational, doesn't matter for this conversation. And then you get the Alexander's band, because it gets muddied as it goes the other way. And then it goes out and it spreads itself out. So it is actually two funnels, one coming towards us, one going away from us. Now,
it reminds me of the Taurus.
Yeah. So that's like something that doesn't exist. So that's like, wait, that to me, when I saw that, I'm like, oh, this is. I'm trying to find all these ways to show people I'm seeing something that's completely different that's not normal. And this is a perfect way, because it is not a perspective a human being has, because maybe it's not even a real perspective, or, well, it is real, but you know what I mean? Not something we can step out of and see, not something you can photograph. How about that? At least with the technology we have.
Yeah, you can see the space in between.
Yeah.
It's that space in between the double rainbows. It's fascinating. It really is. I can picture it kind of in my mind's eye, what you're describing, and the illustrations do very well on that. That's I'll never look at rainbows in another way ever again. But that's good. But that's good. We should always challenge our sense of reality. This is going to give me a lot to think about. And what a great interview.
Like I said, I'm going to go to the consciousness conference in April with the Ions guys. and I'll be speaking again. And the thing about this is I have a machine out story that, or an event that I'm not ready to talk about because I'm still processing it. And that's why I started, see, when things happen to me, I do research too, right? I'm like,
Sure.
oh, wait, what's this? And I'll start like, oh, and so there's something that happened within the last couple of weeks that it's like, wow, I've got to figure out what it means, because it's not like I don't have answers. These things point me in the right direction. And Dr. Pasulka, Diane Pasulka, you guys are familiar with her. She does a religious ufology studies. I took a class from her a couple of years ago. And she said people that are abductees, they do redaction. So we people do redactions because we're embarrassed to tell our story, right? I was more confident telling that I was in a psych ward and I had a drug addiction and I walked down a thriving business, and I minimized the experiencer part of it because I'm like, okay, I can't ignore it, but I can kind of make fun of it, and I can kind of make it a small part of my memoir, but it's still there. She said that is so common, it's not even funny. So, you know, the things we hear, people are like, okay, I'll tell this part, but I'm not going to tell this part. That made me feel great. But the other thing that made me feel fascinated was there's no, and if you guys find this, send it my way. There's no historical anything about somebody with Upsight or anything even like it. There's people, mystics, and obviously they can do it, but I'm talking about the way I can. I'm not saying it's not out there, and I'm saying I haven't found it yet.
All of us that are experiencers, it's important for us to get this out so that we can find other people that have Upsight or other abilities we're not even aware of. I'm sure there is. If it's happened to you, it's happened to others. And so again, thank you so much, Tom, for joining us on here. I really appreciate our conversation. If people can find you, where should they be able to go?
Facebook, Upsight Vision. There's a Upsight Vision for kind of like a support group, for lack of another word. There's only a few of us on there, but if you want to check on there and leave a comment, or you can follow me on Twitter, Tom, TOMEMATTE, and it says Upsight Vision here. Hey guys, it was a pleasure meeting all of you. I had a really good time today. I enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you,
so
Tom.
much,
Great
Tom.
question.